Hello, or should I say hello again to all the people who've been subscribing to my theory videos and whatnot. It's really been a very long time since I've sat down to try and write one of these, and it feels kind of weird to actually try recording this stuff again. First off, I just want to say thanks to the people who've been giving me feedback or telling me they liked watching these videos down in the comments. I never really expected these to get that many views, but I really appreciate the commentary and the kind words I've been getting. I was really surprised to see this little channel has actually been growing even when I haven't really been doing anything with it. This has always just been something I enjoy doing and something that helps me through difficult times. I'm always kind of surprised that people are watching or when people click like or subscribe, but I'm always curious to see how other people see the stuff that I make, and I am glad some people actually enjoy these. If you really did like hearing me droning on about make-believe, I have a lot more of these video essays I want to make, and not just ones on Cyberpunk 2077. But just to start things off again, I want to go back to 77 for something that's been sitting on my computer for a while now. If you really did like hearing me droning on about make-believe, I have a lot more of these video essays I want to make, and not just ones on Cyberpunk 2077. But just to start things off again, I want to go back to 77 for something that's been sitting on my computer for a while now. This one is kind of a theory and kind of not. It's more just my own personal perspective on something that a lot of people, me included, have been talking about since this game came out. In fact, this one's going to be a lot less structured and a lot less point by point than the ones I've made so far. By now, I think most people who've played 77 have heard somewhere or somehow that the Corpo Lifepath and its prologue seems a little off when compared to the other Lifepaths in the game. The Corpo prologue sees V as a mid-level employee of the Arasaka Corporation who gets roped into a very dangerous departmental conspiracy and ends up losing everything they have and out on the streets as a low-level street criminal. Every prologue in the game leads to the same montage of V teaming up with Jackie as a solo and working the streets as a mercenary. While this is pretty much expected with what we see in the Street Kid or the Nomad Lifepaths, a lot of people, myself included, didn't think it made a lot of sense that a career corpo would find themselves on the outs and just suddenly abandon the corporate lifestyle at the drop of a hat. The number one complaint from a lot of people was always the fact that V never tries to find another job in the corporate world. It seemed like V just immediately goes from being a corporate, which is a very well-defined role in both this game and the TTRPG books 77 was based on, to being a solo. And there never seemed to be any kind of real explanation for it. The very first time I ever played through this game was with a corpo character, and I definitely said the same thing. Now, I think with most RPGs, this is definitely a type of problem that's going to come up, or really whether it's a video game or anything that involves storytelling. A lot of writers end up doing this. They have a conclusion they want to get to in the story, so they make sure all roads lead to that conclusion, regardless of whether it makes sense or not. But looking at the story again, I don't actually think that's what happened here. With Cyberpunk and the Corpo Lifepath, I do think CDPR did try to give us some context for why the story plays out this way, but for one reason or another, it wasn't given enough attention and just got drowned out along the way. Personally, I do think the Corpo Lifepath is the most interesting Lifepath in the game, and it makes for the most profound character arc of all, and CDPR did a very good job of giving it depth and fleshing it out. Editing old videos and thinking it over again, I do think there are a lot of things in the game that explain why Corpo V chooses the life of a street criminal, but a lot of these things come after the prologue. Even during the prologue and the beginning of the game, there are a lot of things that show us why V would make this decision, but in both cases the ending of the prologue overshadows these things because all we remember is this jarring shift we see on screen where V just jumps from being a corporate to a solo in a matter of minutes. There's also a lot of lore behind the Corpo situation from the TTRPG books that also explains what's going on, and I do think CDPR did a good job of incorporating these things into the game. There's also one other aspect of those books that kind of fits into a theory I have about the Corpo that I want to go into with this video, but regardless of this theory, I definitely think the Corpo Lifepath makes a lot more sense than first impressions might have us believe. Now, there are a few things I thought I should mention before the video. First, even though I think everyone already knows this, those tabletop RPG books I mentioned are canon to this game. CDPR and the creator of the Cyberpunk series, Mike Pondsmith, collaborated heavily to create the lore around 2077. The publisher of the Cyberpunk books, Artal Sorian, and CDPR have also both confirmed several times that the books in 2077 are both part of the same continuity. So if anyone starts wondering why I'm referencing 2020 or whatnot, it's because those books very much still dictate the lore in this game. Second, while V can be male or female in this game, I do end up referring to a male V. This might take some people out of it, but for the purposes of presentation, it really became a necessity. When it comes to the Lifepaths in this game, though, gender doesn't change the story at all, so anything I say here will apply to both Vs. Lastly, just in case someone sees this before they finish the side quests or the endings or even the Corpo prologue, there will be a lot of spoilers in this video. First off, to me anyways, the Corpo prologue wasn't really just a story about V and Arasaka. It was also a story that was meant to introduce us to the world of corporate employees and the mega corporations of the Cyberpunk universe. And just from what we see in the prologue alone, the corporate world is not a world for the faint of heart. While corporates might be surrounded by luxury and wealth, they very much risk life and limb while living in the most competitive and cutthroat environment imaginable day in and day out. Mega corporations in the Cyberpunk universe are portrayed as the most ruthless and most dangerous entities in the world. The game shows us they're more like governments than companies. While street criminals might kill people every day in 77, its corporations buy and trade in human lives all around the globe. They're capable of waging wars and killing millions, and they're so powerful that no one is capable of stopping them. Governments and authorities are so afraid of them that they basically do whatever they want with impunity, and because of this, their employees are very often above the law and empowered by a company that makes them all but untouchable. Murder is an extremely common practice in these companies, and many of the people who work for them or who are able to get a job with them in the first place are some of the most ruthless people alive. Anyone who has any sort of power is the kind of person willing to have entire departments wiped out just to make sure no one can jeopardize their position in the company. For corporate employees like Corpo V, this means everyone beneath them in the company would gladly kill them to take their job, and everyone above them would gladly have them killed to keep them from taking theirs. And unlike most street criminals, these corporates can very well have unlimited protection, endless resources, and a whole bunch of lower-ranking corporates beneath them who are ruthless and protected just like them. And all of this is just within the corporation, because other corporations will regularly target, capture, and kill the employees of their competitors. The game shows us this in the first few minutes of the prologue. V's boss, Arthur Jenkins, has an entire panel of the European Space Council massacred on live camera. He does this just to delay a vote to take away Arasaka's license to build bases on the moon for another week. He then orders V to arrange the murder of his boss, Susan Abernathy, so that he can take her job as the head of Arasaka's Special Operations Division. A very hesitant V, who he clearly states has little choice in the matter one way or the other.
If anyone finds out we even talked about this, I'll go down with you.
That's true. But everyone knows you only made it to where you are thanks to me. So it's not like they could ever believe you played no part in it.
What'll happen if I refuse?
Don't ask stupid questions. This isn't a request, V.
We find out that Abernathy got word of this harebrained scheme before it even got off the ground, and everybody even remotely connected to it ended up murdered. Jenkins was executed somewhere off screen. Everyone who worked for him personally ended up murdered. Even V's assistant, who makes a marginal appearance in the game and had no involvement at all, ended up tortured and murdered. All of this is just in the prologue, and we see just how atrocious and how merciless the rest of the corporate world really is throughout the rest of the game. Meredith Stout and Anthony Gilchrist are both high-level executives from Militech who are suspected of leaking company information and colluding with outside forces to rob the company. Whoever can't prove their innocence by finding the shipment ends up being tortured and murdered by Militech. We even find out that Gilchrist was in fact the mole, but he was actually coerced into working against Militech by Adam Smasher, an agent of Arasaka who kidnapped a woman who was important to him and forced him to do their bidding. a woman who we also find dead, even though Gilchrist was giving Smasher everything he wanted. In Sandra Dorset's follow-up quest, we find out that Night Corp is working on an artificial intelligence program capable of subliminally conditioning people's minds and turning them into whatever the company needs or wants them to be. In order to test and perfect this program, Night Corp has been secretly deploying it on their lowest-ranking employees and wreaking havoc with their minds. We find out that they purposefully induce psychopathic tendencies in one of their test subjects, who looks like they were singled out for being a calm and empathetic person. This person was slowly twisted and warped into a violent lunatic who murdered another employee and jumped out of a 16th-story window over an argument about coffee. And it's very clear this person was far from the only victim. This has kind of been talked about a lot by Cyberpunk fans, and I was working on a video about this several months back, but it's strongly hinted that Night Corp is the one connected to Mr. Blue Eyes and what's happening to Elizabeth and Jefferson Peralez, meaning Night Corp is very likely using their experimental mind control on the mayor of Night City himself. Then, of course, there are the corporates that we meet in 77 themselves, most of whom are the most corrupt and morally bankrupt people in the game.
Rise and shine, Corpo Swine.
Shit. Well, if it wasn't for you, I'd be... Well, thank you. Were you sent by the company?
Wrong answer.
Then, hold on. What do you want from me?
Heard you been showing girls XBDs. You know, kind where your nose bleeds, your mouth froths, brain fries a little.
No. Wait. I didn't know. Pusher must have sold me a bad batch.
Bullshit. Corpo scum like you don't get their merch on random street corners. You know what you're watching, and what you're showing to others.
All right. It's like... You know how it is when you want to get a girl in a club, right? But you just need a little... a nudge in the right direction.
You fucked up. Bad. Girl was poor, so you figured even the junkie on the corner wouldn't give two shits.
Slow down! What do you mean? What girl?
The one whose blood was all over your limo?
Oh, that! Whew! I thought one of my competitors sent you. Look, this is all some gonk misunderstanding. I'm insured for accidents. Compensation's already been paid out. Case closed. And as for this job of yours, I'm sure we can come to some kind of professional understanding.
Vehicular manslaughter insurance. What a world. Think you're off the hook? Think her father's okay with that? I doubt it.
Nobody asked her to get run over. Let's be reasonable now. I pay, you leave me alone, and I leave the city. How about that, huh?
Only place you're going is to the morgue.
Wakey.
What? Who the hell are you?
What you find more interesting is who sent me. Remember your little science experiment with the Red Ochre clan? The families send their regards.
I do. I remember well. It was an integral stage in my research. You see, we're working on new antibiotic...
Oh, please. Gonna feed me the story of how sacrifices must be made in the quest to save humanity?
I'm not. I know people like you. Hired planning myself. And I know you won't let me go. But at least let me back up the test results for future application. These nomads, they're gone regardless. Let their death serve a purpose.
This antibiotic of yours, I know for damn sure most of humanity couldn't afford it. I know its main purpose is to fatten your holiday bonus. Fuck your data. You die here and now.
If anything, it's probably more dangerous being a corporate than being an edge runner on the streets. Out there, characters more or less know who they're going to piss off and who to avoid, and they're free to make their own moves. Corporates, on the other hand, are living in the Shark Tank day in and day out. The company watches everything they do and controls every move they make. Everyone pretends to be civil and secretly wants them dead, and they have no idea where the hit will even come from. In these companies, they might very well run into some of the most powerful people in the city who may very well decide to kill them just as a precautionary measure, and they wouldn't even know it. And as we see here, even leaving the corporation might very well be a death sentence. V's assistant might be the perfect example. We even find a log of his conversation with his mother. This goofy dingbat starts berating him and jerking him around for complaining while he has such a great job, and you find the poor bastard with his head chopped off in the river because the head of the division he was working for wanted to make an example of his boss's boss. So this is the world and the life that a Corpo V starts off in during the prologue. And when it comes to the narrative of Corpo V doing a 180 and becoming a street mercenary immediately after the prologue, I think that this was a big part of it. The entire game very much portrays the corporate world in the most negative light possible, and it's made very clear that V was actually lucky to get out. Just the character creation screen alone tells us that this is an awful cutthroat life. Looking at it all again, the Corpo prologue was very much written as a cautionary tale, warning players that siding with the corporations will cost them everything they have, including their souls. It and the entire Corpo prologue even directly foreshadows the Arasaka ending, where siding with the corporation to the end means giving up everything V has, along with Johnny's and V's souls, all for the promise of life. V's entire conversation with Jackie throughout the prologue makes it very clear that V is not happy working for Arasaka. All the dialogue choices range from telling Jackie you don't really have any choice in the matter to telling him you don't really see any better options for yourself. And just at the end of the prologue, V was very nearly captured and executed for a crime that he had no control over, all by his own company, which then proceeded to take everything he ever worked for and left him out in the cold. And if we look at the Corpo-specific dialogue throughout the rest of the game, all of this just gets reinforced. Choosing to have V open up personally shows us that V is indeed bitter about his time at Arasaka and the way it all ended. Moreover, V also frequently shows that he doesn't think too kindly about the corporate world in general.
I got a question. When do we get to the real reason we're all here?
Now's a good time as any. Fresh talent gets 30% always. But I'm willing to make an exception in your case. I'm gonna cut you a nice juicy 40 as a bonus for your honesty, V.
Appreciate it, Dex. Even though the Eddies aren't most important to me.
Interesting. So what does qualify as most important?
Thinking Arasaka's due a little payback. Overdue.
Old wounds have yet to heal, huh?
You know what's coming. Bigger fucking problems. Maybe a war. We can't hope to handle the Raffens alone.
So you would sell us out to Biotechnica? Vade, tell him it's a damn rotten idea.
Gotta agree with Pan Am. Sounds like a truly shitty idea.
Thanks.
What could you possibly know about it?
More than you think, Saul. Used to work for Arasaka, so seen plenty.
Arasaka's not Biotechnica. The difference
Is not in the MO. That's always the same. You know what you are to them? Labor. To be exploited and ultimately consumed. Best case scenario.
Thank you, V. I could not have said it better.
100 candidates standing at attention. And Arasaka-sama looked into each of our souls and chose the one who would serve him best.
Did what you had to keep from going hungry.
I sense that you judge me, and yet you have no right to. Unlike you and your friend Mr. Wells, I was not arrogant. I did not take the easy path.
Saying you got no dirt on your hands?
There are no clean hands, but it is important how they become dirty.
So spill, how'd you sully yours?
Arasaka gave me what no one else could. Values I could honor, live for. This was most important. You dirty your hands for money. I, in the name of principles.
Slaving away for a corp. Not exactly everybody's dream.
Oh yes, because thieving is so much more honorable.
At least I'm not fleecing this planet and its people in the name of profit margins.
Corporations need capital and resources to keep all in order. Who else is to rule? Corrupt governments? The masses attached to feeders? Cynics? Nihilists? Like you?
Come on, not everybody wants to change the world.
Sadly, this is true.
Forgetting I was at Arasaka, saw how corps operate. It wasn't roses and rainbows. And you know what? Nobody owns me. I'm free. You should try it.
Sometimes I wish to become a nomad, to leave this world, forget everything.
Miss the warmth of the corporate lab? That unique thrill of internal power struggles?
What? I've got a score to settle is all.
Aha! I knew it, I knew it, I knew it. Rats still in the race.
Hello, V. Man, time flies.
And for a death just ain't what he used to be.
Keyword inferred. But Abernathy is purging the depth. Purged me. They took my house, accounts, implants. But I'm not done. Gonna prove she was wrong about me. Shove it down her throat.
Ah, see you make your move stepping on me. Gonna serve my head up on a silver platter? And you think Abernathy will welcome you back, arms outstretched?
That's about the size of it. Now turn. Hands on your head. Hop to it. Yeah, I'm kinda in a rush here.
Remember Joey Lavani? Gonk from mergers and acquisitions. Pissed himself the day he was fired. His knees were shaking so much he couldn't even walk. Guards had to drag him out to the curb.
What the fuck are you talking about?
Saw him as the most pathetic guy ever at Arasaka. Not so anymore. You just took that title.
You really don't care if I end you.
Open your eyes, Frank. Arasaka threw you out like so much trash. And you're gonna go back and beg for mercy, knowing they have none to give.
Lots of people have gone back.
Lots? Nah. Some? Sure. To a good brain cleansing just in case. That what you really want? It's a closed book, Frank. Gotta refigure your life. Game over. Start again.
Start again? Got nothing to start with. Less.
Got iron in a full clip. Add a little gumption, you're good to go in NC. Just keep it together, Frank.
Hey, don't look at me that way, Merc. You know I'm right.
I know the game NC makes you play. I know the rules, all the tricks in the book.
So you ought to know when to get in line, and when you can stick your neck out. Because you stick it out at the wrong time, and there'll always be some shark ready to bite your head off.
But there's a line. Not every order's worthy of being followed.
Let me tell you when I'll stop doing what I'm told. when I retire. Not a day sooner.
You know, yesterday I think I'd made up my mind. I actually called you because I wanted to say goodbye. The city's chewed me up. They're spitting me out.
You know, think if you lined up all the cities next to each other, they'd all look the same. Corps are making sure of that, making life uniform everywhere.
Maybe so. Maybe all cities got alluring faces. But stay long in one and you see what's behind it.
All of this really explains why V would leave the corporate world behind instead of looking for work with another corporation. The story does emphasize that V feels wronged by Arasaka and that V very much sees the corporations as a toxic and destructive influence. So I do think the narrative of 77 does justify why V decides to take to the streets, because the point of the Corpo Lifepath seems to be that V has very much decided to leave it behind in search of something better. But aside from all that, there is one other aspect to the Corpo Lifepath that I wanted to dive into, and this one has to do with V in general. Now, this section will be open to interpretation. This is simply what I think could be at work here with the Corpo Lifepath, so I'm going to try and present my reasoning as best as I can. Do keep in mind that this really doesn't change any of the things I mentioned before. I just think that CDPR's writers left this door open for the purposes of role-playing V however one wants. If we look at V as a character, most things about him are left entirely in the hands of the player. That said, there are a few things that never change no matter what the player does. If we look at any of the prologues, none of them feature any stat checks the player can pass or fail. If we look at the Lifepath-specific dialogues, they never have anything to do with stats or player builds. In this case, a solo build, a netrunner build, or a techie build will all have the same Corpo prologue and the same Corpo-specific dialogues. The same goes for the 6-month montage that plays after each prologue. None of these things change according to player choices. So what these things show us should be considered true for every possible version of Corpo V, no matter what the player does. Keeping all that in mind, if we look at Corpo V in general, he really doesn't play the role of a typical corporate or a typical executive at all. These are the roles from Cyberpunk 2020 or Cyberpunk Red that 77's Corpos are based on. Corporates or executives, first and foremost, were business people and managers. Both editions of the Cyberpunk books describe them as junior executives who lead teams and take care of the day-to-day business of a corporation. Characters like Arthur Jenkins, Meredith Stout, Anthony Gilchrist, or Rachel Kasich are all exactly like the corporates or executives that you'd find in the role-playing game. If we look at those books, these are the skills that corporates or executives use. The corporate executive is a very socially oriented role. It focuses almost entirely on getting people to do what you want, navigating the business world, and using corporate resources to achieve your goals. Now, looking at this prologue and a lot of the Corpo dialogue, V does seem to have at least some of these very skills. He knows how to read people, he understands corporate procedures, he knows how to get people to do what he wants, and he even seems to keep an eye on the stock market using his optic implants in the prologue. And in the Corpo prologue, V very much does seem to have a middle management role in his department. He assigns tasks and makes decisions with ongoing missions, and he answers to the boss who runs all the projects.
I have those reports you asked for?
I don't have the time, just send them my way.
I need your stamp on something. It's possible one of our assets was exposed.
Is it Frankfurt again?
No, different issue. Local.
Tell me, quick version.
Our agent at Biotechnica suspects they might be onto him. Should we greenlight exfil or let him keep looking?
Pull him out, but calmly. Don't raise any eyebrows. Otherwise they'll catch on.
Jenkins will be livid.
I'll handle Jenkins.
Understood.
But beyond this, there are a few things I think very much suggest that V could be much more than just an ordinary corporate. If we look at V's Arasaka computer, we can find V's employee file. This says that V is an agent for the counterintelligence department. Susan Abernathy is the director of special operations. Meredith Stout is a senior operations manager, but even though V seems to be running operations for Arasaka, he's listed as an agent. And the reason that title is interesting is because we actually do see other Arasaka agents in the game. The guys who stand guard at Arasaka Tower's front doors and take to fighting off V if you storm the tower are also called agents. These are the same kinds of agents that attack V and Takamura after the heist. They're armed with advanced cybernetics, and they take to fighting the company's enemies or tracking them down and killing them. You'll also find these guys in different places throughout the game, carrying out shady deals for Arasaka or carrying out special operations during gigs. And if we look at these agents, they're even wearing the exact same outfit that a male Corpo V starts the game wearing. Characters like Frank Nostra or Arthur Jenkins are all members of the same division, and they're dressed in regular corporate suits, while V starts the game dressed like the special operatives of Arasaka, the same ones sent to take him back to the company for execution at the end of the prologue. This computer entry is the only time in the game we ever get a hint of V's exact role in Arasaka. By all the indications that we have, an agent for Arasaka is something of a cross between a solo and a corporate. They can clearly function as assassins, and they clearly rank above the average Corpo soldier, as they actually do carry out special missions. And as we see with V, they can also have an executive role and can be tasked with management duties. Now, if anyone who sees this is thinking this is too far of a stretch, or if you're telling yourself those enemy titles don't have any narrative significance, I couldn't argue with you. On its own, this probably means nothing, but this does actually tie into and explain a lot of other things about V as a Corpo. Having combat skills in and of itself is nothing unusual, and in the tabletop game, you could absolutely create a combat-heavy corporate if you wanted. But on top of that, we know that V works for the counterintelligence department. He doesn't work in operations or government relations or corporate extractions. He doesn't handle the business side of Arasaka. Counterintelligence implies that V specializes exclusively in a kind of corporate security. If we want to take this even further, given that Susan Abernathy is Arthur Jenkins' boss, and she's the director of special operations, it could be inferred that counterintelligence is just a part of the larger special operations division. Either way, this ties into what we find under V's employee evaluation. This says that V is notably suited to working in the field. A mission report goes on to say that Agent V personally tracked and intercepted a spy in Arasaka's Watson factory who was suspected of working for Militech. Then under V's profile, it says that V is trained in conducting intelligence and establishing defenses in event of armed conflict. All of this reads noticeably different from the role of a corporate or an executive we see in the tabletop books. It describes someone who can manage assets and run operations while also being very capable of getting his hands dirty. Where characters like Meredith Stout and Rachel Kasich seem to rely exclusively on having other people carry out their orders, V seems just as much of a field operative as he does a leader of any kind. I think Corpo V was given this particular background in the prologue because it was a way to try and justify leading into the 6-month montage of V and Jackie working the streets as solos. Corpo V is an agent who isn't really your typical corporate or executive because he's also a solo. Again, this happens in all Lifepaths and regardless of player builds. Even if the player puts no points into reflex or body, the game makes it very clear that V is at least capable of functioning as a solo. V is acting as a solo and taking charge of the streets with gun in hand for 6 months straight. The game also tells us at various points that V is a capable netrunner. We see this from the start of the game, where no matter what your intelligence is, you start off with the ability to interface with technology. The game also gives you access to your techie abilities from the start, no matter what your build. CDPR told us when this game was still in development that the player would be able to play as a solo, a netrunner, and a techie simultaneously without having to adhere to a class system. And in the game, that's exactly what we see V doing. This is almost like the video game's version of the multi-classing system that they introduced in Cyberpunk Red. Corpo V isn't just a corporate or an executive, but he's also a solo, a netrunner, and a techie. This is the way I see V in all Lifepaths, and I think things like this is just the narrative of the game making a way for this kind of character to exist. It makes room for whatever build the player wants while letting them pick any backstory they want. But the flexibility in backstory and role-playing could go even further if we look at Corpo V's origins. V tells Takamura that he grew up in Charter Hill. He also tells Judy that family gatherings were where they actually got to eat real food. These things suggest that Corpo V came from a wealthy family that most likely worked for one of Night City's corporations. But there's almost no chance whatsoever that corporation was Arasaka. Corporates will often send generation after generation into the same company, but according to what 77 in Red tells us, Arasaka was kicked out of the new United States altogether in 2023. After the Fourth Corporate War, they were completely barred from operating on American soil. It wasn't until 2070 that they were officially allowed back into the States. We know that male and female V were both born in 2049, meaning V would have been around 21 when Arasaka actually returned to Night City. This means that Corpo V didn't spend his life going to schools or programs run by Arasaka. In fact, he could very well have grown up connected to any other corporation in Night City, including some that don't exist anymore by 2077. Now, Arasaka did have very limited and covert operations in some parts of the NUSA during this time, but these were very few in number. This means that by 2070, very few people who come to work for an Arasaka in Night City would have actually been one of those people. And the chances of V's parents or his entire family being part of these is very unlikely. First, the game tells us that Corpo V has been with Arasaka Counterintelligence for 2 years. Beyond that, there's absolutely nothing indicating any kind of extensive service or any significant connection to the company. Secondly, Arthur Jenkins pointedly tells V the only reason he has the job that he does was all thanks to him, which in fact greatly seems to disprove any sort of special connection to Arasaka. So to sum this part of the video up, it's very likely that Corpo V is not your typical Corpo. He doesn't start the game as your typical executive. He's an agent for Arasaka, which seems almost like a multi-classed executive solo. The game shows us he very much indeed is a functional solo, and we then find out he's also a passable netrunner and a passable techie. He also very likely didn't have any connection to the Arasaka Corporation until only a few years before the prologue. In this regard, the character is almost written as a blank slate that could have come from a wide variety of backgrounds before joining Arasaka as a corporate, all of which we could very well interpret as another reason he would leave the corporate world behind with his friend Jackie and try to take his skills to better places. But all in all, these are all the things I wanted to dive into in Cyberpunk 2077's Corpo Lifepath. And obviously, I'm sure I was only highlighting the obvious in some parts, but taking a second look at the Corpo's story after the first playthrough, these are the impressions that I got. As I said, there wasn't actually that much theory in this one, but that last section was a take on the Corpo that I've had in mind for some time now. Like all these theories, this was just what I found in the game and how I see them. If anyone sees this and disagrees, feel free to tell me why. I'm sure some people might not be 100% behind the narrative significance of some of these things, and I'm sure some people might just think I'm using bad math to justify bad math. Still, all of this is very much the way I see Corpo V. In conclusion, the way the Corpo Lifepath plays out makes a lot more sense than I first thought. It's first and foremost a story about V trying to leave the bleak and ruthless corporate world behind for something better. The moment the opportunity presents itself, a very worn-down V leaves to make a life outside of Arasaka. On top of that, the very start of the game actually establishes that V is very likely not a typical corpo, but instead a cross to some degree between a corporate and a solo, who very likely comes from a very ambiguous background that's entirely outside of Arasaka. If anyone thinks I've missed something, feel free to tell me. If you have a different take on something I showed, or if you think I've misinterpreted something, I'd love to discuss it. If there's something I got wrong, tell me that too. Alright, thanks for watching, anyone.